Hi everyone, I'm here out in a beautiful natural setting in Sedona, Arizona to make a video that's about our connection to all of this, the connection to the natural world. And from my perspective, it's something that's extremely fundamental in all of our lives, regardless of where we live, whether we live in cities or in the country. But in fact, our lives have all been affected by an internal belief system, an internal set of ideas that remain largely unconscious in us, that we have about our relationship with nature. And that it is in fact a relationship on a very deep level. And that in changing our relationship with nature, we change our relationship with ourselves, we change our relationship with the planet, we feel more at home, we feel like we belong, we feel like we're a participant in something much greater than ourselves, and that our relationship with nature is therefore something incredibly fundamental to us, to our happiness, fulfillment, and even to our consciousness. So I'm making these videos about ideas which might change our relationship with nature, and practices as well. Over the last 400 years, we have gained an idea that we're separate from nature. And this started mostly with the scientific revolution. And the idea that we've inherited, that has developed over all of these centuries, recent centuries, is that we're inhabited in here, that this is our location. Our consciousness is here, and that is actually something special to us. Out there, consciousness doesn't really exist, except in other humans. Out there in nature, all around me here, is a sort of mindless material process. And that as I walk out through nature here, that I'm an observer of it, that these are objects outside of me, and I'm located here, I have my own existence, I'm somehow a kind of a separate bubble, a separate entity. And that idea is actually not scientifically based at all, and it remains unexamined. It's unconscious largely, and it remains unexamined. And I'd like to talk about ideas that we might explore, try out, that might help us change this. Our ideas affect our experience. So how can we change our experience in nature, our experience of our relationship with nature? And I'd like to tell a story to start this process. And many of us may have similar stories. I know I do to this one, but it's a very famous story, at least where I come from. And it's the story of Robert Bruce. Robert Bruce was a Scottish king, but prior to becoming a king, the British had taken over Scotland, and he was a rebel trying to free Scotland, and he was defeated many times by the British, and gradually became very discouraged. And the story goes that he was in a cave hiding from the British and wondering whether he should give up this process, this whole rebellion process. His brother had been executed, his wife was being held by the British. He's like, is this worth it? Is this struggle worth this much loss and struggle? And as he was thinking this, so the story goes, he noticed a spider that was trying to make a web across an opening in part of the cave. And the spider was swinging and trying to get to the other side to join its first thread. And it kept failing. And he watched the spider, and Robert Bruce, had failed in battle 6 times prior to this. He watched the spider try 6 times to get this web across. And then lo and behold, on the 7th time, it connected, managed to draw the thread tight and started to make its web. And he thought to himself, I should try again. He did, And guess what? It all slowly worked out. And 8 years later, he drove the British out of Scotland. Obviously a good thing to do. The English out of Scotland, I should say. And he was the King of Scotland. So now that story, we can go a couple of different ways with that kind of story. Our typical way of interpreting that would be, well, that was just a coincidence. The spider happened to be there, and Robert Bruce is making that interpretation from something that's completely, really unrelated to his situation and his story, but he's using it that way. It's just his consciousness that's using it. Another way to go with interpreting that would be that actually nature was communicating to him that we aren't so separate from nature, that there's a way in which nature can reflect back to us what we might need to know and to hear. It can inspire us in a way that's much more direct and mysterious and connected than we might think. And from that story, it's then interesting to reflect today on the progress in neuroscience, in particular the neuroscience of consciousness. So for many, many years, the subject of neuroscience, studying our brains and how they work, has been hardline materialist. Francis Crick, the discoverer of DNA, said that we are no more than our neurons firing. We're no more than an electrochemical process in our brains. In other words, our consciousness is somehow produced by this. It's what's called an epiphenomena. And so for many, many years, that is how our science of neuroscience has looked at our own consciousness. And that would support the view that we're separate from all of this and that we are the only ones that have this. But in the last 10 or 20 years, neuroscience has been trying to study consciousness and to explain how it might exist. And they've not been doing very well. And some of the most well-known neuroscientists have started to change their view. Instead of looking at how the brain produces consciousness, they're starting to say, well, we now think that consciousness is everywhere. So the fact that it comes out of science may make it authoritative, but many of us, of course, have been thinking this way for a long time. If consciousness is everywhere, then our consciousness is in a larger consciousness, that we are potentially connected to a larger consciousness. So I'd like to suggest 2 possible hikes to do. Hike 1, and we can do this in our imaginations or we can actually do it. Hike 1 is we hike out with our usual consciousness, or bring to consciousness the belief structure that may be hidden within most of us, that we are located here in our brains, that we're separate from all of this. The trees, the rocks around me are not conscious, and I'm the observer of it. And that's my relationship with nature. How is that going to affect my relationship with nature? Hike 2, the following day perhaps, would be I'm hiking and consciousness is everywhere. Not just located in me, it's all around me. And that my consciousness is simply a part of the larger consciousness. I'm experiencing my consciousness, but to some degree, I'm experiencing a larger consciousness. And it is experiencing me. My thoughts are occurring in it. Its events and thoughts are occurring in me as well. And we could then take that hike, and I would surmise that it would be a very different experience. That in practicing that, we could start to change our relationship with nature in a very positive way and change our own experience of life. And that is something worth doing. So I suggest that as an experiment, and I suggest undoing this old thought, which has no support from science, even if we pretend it does, to a thought that has equally as much support from science, that we're a part of a larger consciousness, that we belong here as a part of this, we're participants, and that we're connected. And all we have to do is change our thoughts, become more sensitive, become more aware, to start to realize and confirm that thought. And our experiences will become more and more like Robert Bruce's, and perhaps even more profound than Robert Bruce's story of the spider. So that's idea number one in our process of changing our relationship with nature. Thank you.